I mean, one thing I haven't considered up until this point about this notion of non-linear warfare and Vladislav Surkov um, playing off neo-Nazi skinhead groups against the radical left in Russia. Um, like one thing I didn't really consider about that now, it's like it might actually be kind of a good thing. I mean, it's yeah, it's got potential in terms of being kind of a funny little joke, is it not? Like, give them some cash, both of them, goad them into seeking a common enemy, play one off against the other. You know what, it wouldn't surprise me much actually if all this Antifa and Proud Boys nonsense in the United States has arisen in recent years as a result of Russian cyber attacks. And by cyber attacks, what I really mean is like all these like poor Siberian Russian kids who've learned like computer hacking skills and coding skills. They're being co-opted by the Russian government to sort of write fake Facebook accounts or fake Twitter accounts and bot accounts and all this sort of stuff to sort of spread inflammatory nonsense on the internet and like rile up teenagers in the United States into becoming like Antifas or sort of middle-aged, pot-bellied, braying neocons in the United States, and like the sort of the wimpy young incel type who will drift into the alt right, and because they're on the computer all day on Reddit and 4chan and all this sort of thing, just getting the hate into your brain all the time as feminists and Antifa, we don't like that's left, and then all the Antifa people, like the frail, bleeding heart, sort of deeply idealistic young liberal arts college student thinking something and intelligent, something must be done. Something must be done. Where do we turn in the face of this? And like maybe, just maybe, like you don't really realise that you're part of non-linear warfare and you're acting as pawns in the game of Vladimir Putin who's trying to destabilise American democracy. Or, maybe he sees sort of like ideological slants or ideological differences and bipartisanship as just a stupid joke. And he's like trying to ridicule her, and we play off against one another. But more likely, I think he's trying to destabilise American democracy. So, like the likes of Alex Jones will talk about so-and-so being a shill for so-and-so, usually the American government. Because all this conspiracy theory stuff is very anti-American, and it's very anti-West, I think, very often. I mean, they never say, like, China's doing this, that, and the other, like, do they? It's always, it's the government, by which they mean it's the American government. Like, is it really the fucking American government, though? Because the thing is, people like Alex Jones, they don't know jack shit about China. They don't really know that much about Russia. They don't know all that much about Europe. And, like, it's never Britain, is it? By the way, it always used to be Britain. Because at one point, yeah, we were trying to take over the world. And we got quite far with that. And, it's... But who is it nowadays? Always the American government. Doing this, that, and the other. Like, has the American government done some creepy shit? Yeah, they have. Like MK Ultra. Like, that was going on in the 50s and 60s. That was weird. Like, mind control experiments. But yeah, I mean, it's all declassified now, we know about it. But they had legitimate concerns back then that the Russians were trying to do that. And who knows what they were up to back then. For all we know, they were. So, I mean, and this is what happens when you have vast cultural and ideological differences between two emerging superpowers, or in the case of the States, a superpower that's already emerged. but Russia's in the process of really becoming a superpower at that point. I suppose, well, really before then with the war and so on, and before then with like war stockpiling and 5-year plans and Stalin and all this sort of stuff. But yeah, like once you start seeing through the web of conspiracy theories, and once you start, or stepping back from it all, trying to see the bigger picture, we're talking about history and politics and economics and geography and geopolitics. This is a confluence of geography and politics. It requires a lot of knowledge, and to my mind, this is how a conspiracy theory ends up becoming assembled. Like evidence. That's what we need for a theory, right? So what we're going to do, we'll take bits, pieces here, there, and everywhere. Narrative. That's it holds together, sort of, doesn't it? You know what I mean? It's one of those sorts of things. But to bust up the conspiracy theory, just go like, huge cultural and economic and political forces acting over many decades, and like case in point, 9/11. One of the pieces of evidence that they point to is like, I heard this guy say, like, oh, jet fuel, it can't burn steel, it can't melt steel. I'm like, well, you don't need to melt it, because the force of the impact knocks out all the girders. And people like saying it's a controlled demolition. It's like, well, it went in pretty straight. That plane would have broken all the girders, I'm pretty certain. Got big, and I'm not a civil engineer, for goodness sake. Structural engineer, sorry. Probably. And no. And if any physicist could really be bothered to do it, and to recreate it and to model it, or a team of physicists and engineers, it could be done, certainly. That seems like nowhere near out of the bounds of possibility to do that sort of thing. And yeah, because now we're sort of engaged in this war in Ukraine, and from the Putin side, we're hearing about Vladimir Zelensky, who's a Jewish man, by the way, of he's being accused of harbouring Nazis or neo-Nazis in his own country, which I guess is sort of a difficult thing to try and balance, when you have to sort of try and balance the freedom of expression with concerns over political liberties and so on, civil liberties, and so every free nation does have fascists, which is sort of a consequence of freedom, really. And also, the freest nation in the world apparently is the United States, at least when it comes to speech. And was the United States got fascists? Yeah, it's riddled with them. It's got neo-Nazis, and it's got the Klan still, the Ku Klux Klan. And yeah, everywhere where you get freedom, you get fascism. So you got to take the rough with the smooth, sort of, haven't you? And yeah, the price of freedom is that people can believe what they like, and they can hold to their own ideological stance, even if that ideological stance is horrifying. But and the best we can do as people who are reasonable is try to reason with people and try to reason them out of their prejudices. There are all sorts of very committed and brilliant people trying to do that. But yeah, so in terms of marshalling evidence for conspiracy theories, what certain people on the internet who insist on blowing smoke now up the arse of all people of Vladimir fucking Putin, and Like, I was about to do it at the beginning of this episode, sorry, but that was a joke, honestly. Is it? Oh, but the Azov Brigade. I was like, the Azov Brigade, like, is thought to have contained about 10 to 20% white supremacists. Okay, and like it was this paramilitary organisation that formed back in 2014 after Putin annexed Crimea. It's been linked to war crimes in the Donbass region of Ukraine. They're part of the Ukrainian National Guard. Putin's also since then been sponsoring separatists in the Donbass region. It's very, very thorny. And it's like saying, oh, you know, these people have committed torture and killed kids. Like, Putin tortures and kills people. Putin's killed 14 children since the start of the Ukrainian invasion. And if he keeps up his act, many more will die. It's a tragedy of war. Kids die in wars. You know, and yeah, it is one of the better reasons for not having them. But who wants the war? It seems. Putin seems to sense any moment of weakness in Ukraine that he possibly can and dive straight in, like he did in 2014 after the Orange Revolution. It's like, oh, take Crimea now, like, quick. And it's like, oh, God, that wasn't 2014, wasn't it? Or was it a different thing? And yeah, so, because well, I mean, what's Putin after? Probably natural resources, I'd have said. That you know, will do his country no end of favours. And like, am I excusing like right-wing fanatics in all this? No, the Azov Battalion, yeah, like something ought to be done about that. They should be disbanded or kicked out of the National Guard or whatnot. But to say on the basis of that you know, the Ukrainian government or the Ukrainian people like sponsor fascism or something of that nature, or Nazism, is a bit of a stretch, no? And where am I even going with this? It's like let's take a kernel of evidence and think that the hypothesis they've tried to establish, like, that rests upon the kernel of evidence, is established because of that kernel of evidence. Theories need a bit more than that to really be theories. So it's not, and like these old battalions, like, yeah, they seem to have rejected that, the ideological stance of their origins, even though they've got something that looks suspiciously like an SS symbol, or it is in fact a symbol used by the original SS on their insignia, which could do with being changed. I don't know, it is a little fucked up. Or maybe Putin has a point. What am I saying? Repression of freedom of speech in Russia, the repression of free, open and fair elections, you know, Putin being in power since, was it 1999? After Boris Yeltsin, and was it 2000 or 2001? I can't remember. But yes, Putin is clearly an autocrat. I think Zelensky is probably a democrat. And they don't want, you know, to fall headlong into Putin's style of government and establish a police state under a puppet government like the government in Belarus. because values of liberality and democracy, etc., etc., should prevail over the values of thieving, money grubbing, oligarchical, autocratic, repressive, megalomaniacal. Oh, by the way, all the sorts of people who I've come across sticking up for Putin, these are all the sorts of people who believe in conspiracy theories, but they believe in conspiracy theories of a certain flavour. And like all these sorts of conspiracy theories, like you get like people say, oh, it's the Freemasons, it's the Bilderbergs, it's the City of London Corporation, and back in the day it was always the Elders of Zion, and it's of the Jews running the banks and what not, and the media and all that. It's like the Nazis rose to power on the basis of conspiracy theories. That is how dangerous this shit is. And when it comes to the Bilderbergs and all these ancient fucking bloodlines they talk about, the aristocracy, yeah, I believe it was set up by an aristocrat in some shitty looking hotel in Belgium. And like, yeah, it's probably the best hotel he could afford, and yet it probably is a bunch of aristocratic old people from Europe getting together to try and figure out how to keep hold of their increasingly shrinking pile of money through what to invest in, more than likely. Because the thing about loads and loads of aristocrats now in the world is like these old money types and these people from these big formerly powerful families in Europe, like loads of them, they haven't got a pot to piss in. They're selling off all their land and houses, and the trust funds are drying up, and like it'll be so and so from the past silverware next. Like, oh, that Rolex was from 1945 when our family had money. And all this sort of thing. Yeah, like... And like the wealthy industrialists were rising in the 19th century. Yeah, they were competing with the aristocrats then, and that is not a conspiracy theory. That is, well, it's not a conspiracy, but it's certainly a theory in history. Like, Marxist theory and the rise of industrial societies is pretty well documented. But it was of course exploitative and repressive of the poor, like the workers. I mean, that's not a really disputed fact, I don't think. And I think as a theory, yeah, that certainly holds up quite well. But yeah, like most of history's been run in pre-industrial times. Yeah, like a lot was run by wealthy and powerful families from these ancient bloodlines. However, it's a lot different nowadays. And we're not in the Middle Ages anymore, or the Renaissance, or the early modern period, or sort of the 18th century, when these big, powerful families were still big, powerful families. We're now in the 21st century, where like the more powerful people on Earth, people like Mark Zuckerberg. Ooh, a Jew. He wouldn't have had much power, really, back in like the 18th century. I wouldn't have said. No one would listen to him back then. I mean, how would it work? No, anti-Semitism would have been too rife, wouldn't it? Back then, for it to really be, possible for him to rise that high in the world. Or like Elon Musk. Have all these wealthy, powerful industrial figures of the modern world. And that's sort of how it works, which I think is better, really, instead of just inheriting wealth and exploiting labour. Even though, like, well, actually, the likes of Facebook do? Are they exploitative as such of their employees? I know we're an evil corporation, but I don't know. Where was I going with this? Well, Jewish people have always been successful in sort of various fields. I swear back in sort of the 15th century, in say Italy or Spain, or France or even the Netherlands, it was difficult for Jews to like evade persecution in Europe. Was it any better in like the 16th centuries, the 17th centuries and 18th centuries? I don't want to dodge anti-Semitism. But I'm not really being anti-Semitic at all, because I'm trying to identify anti-Semitism in history and say that there's far less of it now. Since I'm really criticising Christian society and its varying levels of anti-Semitism, or attempting to, which I should really know about, because like, I mean, this it details quite a lot about Jewish persecution, but probably not enough actually. But I've forgotten most of it. I've forgotten segments of it. Ugh. I'm too tired for this shit. So yeah, the idea that like the Ukrainian regime under Vladimir Zelensky is a Nazi fascist regime, I think reflects a certain degree of absurdity in thinking, and it reflects a certain degree of conspiratorialness in thinking, and yeah, it's silly, really. I'm tired of conspiracy theories. I really am. I want to know the facts of reality. I don't want to know someone's theory, by which they mean hypothesis, or piece of conjecture, or piece of speculation, more often than not. And I'm tired of people blowing smoke up the arse of Vladimir Putin and sort of fawning over Putin, and sort of saying, one guy saying, oh, Putin grew up on the rough streets of St. Petersburg. Oh, he must have had a really rough childhood. And like, oh, goodness sake, loads of people have had rough childhoods. They don't go on to become monsters. You know, like, it's not an excuse for anything, having a rough childhood. It's not an excuse for bad behaviour. It's not an excuse for killing your enemies in the street. It's not an excuse for waging huge wars in Ukraine over natural resources blatantly, or manipulating like price of commodities, or in one way or another making money for oligarchs. And I hesitate to think, but because all these people are coming from these conspiracy circles, which is sort of underpinned by, you know, these ancient bloodline types bang on about it, and I think the Elders of Zion stuff is still behind that to some extent. I know David Icke sort of pointed to some sort of Jewish groups that are still like lurking in the background, as they would, because they're horrible, sneaky Jews. um, and I think maybe, just maybe, it's because they'd rather side with that desiccated crocodile Vladimir Putin and not with an honourable and decent Jewish man like Zelensky. And I think that might be more like why. So there we go. Yeah, thank you everyone for watching. Try and see through the web of conspiracy if you possibly can. If you can, try and tease out these people's, conspiracy theorists' real motives for doing things. It almost certainly focuses on some ideological deviance of one form or another. It almost certainly focuses on money very often also, I think, from book sales and things like that, or sales of specious books, or money and or from the exploitation of people's credulity and rank idiocy. And to sum up, the non-linear warfare thing, Russian cyber attackers very likely planted the seeds of fear and dissent, or fear really, of certain groups in society in the minds of young Americans on both sides of the political divide. And probably the problem is that there is a political divide at all, to some extent, though the solution to that is not to have a one-party system, but probably to have a many-party system and a plurality of democracy. And rainbow coalitions forming, sort of happened in Germany recently with Scholz's election. And let's hope this situation in Ukraine turns out for the best. Let's hope Zelensky keeps fighting the good fight. I'm certain he will. I see a lot of things in that man. What I do not see is cowardice at all. I don't think he has a scrap of cowardice in him. And I don't think the Ukrainian people do either. I think they're going to, give the Russians hell going into Ukraine. Which is a good thing, I think, because it represents a country that wants liberality and democracy and freedom, and not the authoritarian regime of police state operating former KGB spy thugs like Vladimir Putin. So thank you very much for watching, everyone. Bye bye bye, love you lots.